Good evening and welcome to the State of the Nation Address 2021, coming to you live from Cape Town. My name is Adriaan Basson, editor of News 24, and I'm joined tonight in our building, the Media 24 headquarters in Cape Town on the foreshore by Kunita Hunter, the political editor of News 24, as well as Lamise Omaji, our senior economics reporter from Fin24. Good evening, colleagues. Nice to have you here.
Thank you very much for having us.
It's a sweltering day in Cape Town. It's really, really hot. We had to switch off the aircon so that you can hear us clearly. But I wonder if the speech is going to be as hot tonight. It's the fifth speech of President Cyril Ramaphosa, his fifth State of the Nation, since he so dramatically got into power, was elected into power in 2018, Kunita. It feels like a long time ago when Cyril Ramaphosa was installed as president after Jacob Zuma had to retire early.
Absolutely, and I think that the fact that we are sitting in the studio and not in Parliament says a lot of the dynamic that we are in at the moment in 2021. It is his fifth speech. You would think that he would be a lot more comfortable, but I do contend that it's probably the most difficult State of the Nation address that he has to deliver tonight, just after 7 p.m. And it's definitely not going to be an easy feat.
We're going to talk about President Ramaphosa, his successes, his failures, the criticism against him until he speaks at 7. We're going to listen to him at 7, listen to the plans for the year, and then we're going to come back to analyze what he has actually said and see if it made any sense. Kunita, but let's just talk about the optics of tonight. Normally we would be sitting outside Parliament in a marquee tent next to our other colleagues. There would be lots of bantering and laughing and sharing of cigarettes and water, no mask, no social distancing. And that seems like a very long time ago. We are not there. We're not allowed to be on the premises tonight.
And some of us would also be, caught up in EFF storms and bricks being thrown at windows.
No bricks tonight.
No bricks tonight. But it definitely, quite bizarre, particularly because of the pandemic. Parliament had decided to go with a hybrid approach to the State of the Nation this year, obviously costing far less, just 100,000 rand compared to.
We can do the saving.
Absolutely. I think it doesn't make any sense moving forward to have that level of millions and millions going for the pomp and ceremony. But the fact that you're going to only have less than 50 MPs, the president is going to be there. The Chief Justice is not going to be in the House. The Deputy Chief Justice will be in the House.
Justice Raymond Zondo.
One Raymond Zondo,
oh,
yes.
Wow, that is quite significant.
Yes, and obviously the Deputy President is also going to be there, and the Speaker, and the fact that the media contingent is a fraction of what it usually is inside the House. Our reporter Jan is inside the House.
Jan
Gerber is inside the House. Jason is outside. But definitely all precautions have been taken to stop this, for the pandemic. But it also is, despite the fact that we're not having that pomp and ceremony. It's also quite sobering in terms of where we are as a country. Usually you'd see, the armed forces, you'd see, you'd already hear from the, the salutes and all of those things. We're not having any of that because I think the mood is, get down to business and tell us what your plan is for the year ahead.
I saw earlier this week that the EFF said they will not be in the House tonight, so they won't send their contingent of, I don't know how, probably around 5. I don't know how many seats they were allocated. Of course, a year ago they stood up against Ramaphosa after giving him a bit of a smooth ride in the first 2 Sonas. They were, of course, back in the day, very anti-Jacob Zuma and wanted President Zuma out. Now they're drinking tea together.
Yes.
But last year they made a big stand against the presence of FW de Klerk, the former president, in the House.
Yeah, that was quite chaotic. It postponed the delivery of the speech of President Cyril Ramaphosa. He did have it quite easy in his first few addresses to the nation compared to the latter years of Jacob Zuma, where the EFF would famously chant, "Pay back the money," for example. And now they're not going to be in the House. I don't know if there's going to be any disruption via the Zoom platform, but obviously Speaker Thandi Modise is very well equipped with the mute button.
With the mute button. Yes. Sorry, you're on mute.
So we're not going to see, or they're not expecting to see a lot of disruption tonight. Definitely. the politics at play that we usually see, the antics, the words from the leader of the opposition parties, for example, you see the invited guests. You're not going to have that same level of interaction that we usually see, and also the feedback, because you almost get a sense, as me and you have sat in that house for over a decade, when the president gives his State of the Nation address, you kind of see this is what's important. You remember when Cyril Ramaphosa gave his inaugural speech, there was this electricity in the house,
yes.
And you definitely yes, and you felt that you were part of history in that moment. Then a few years later there was that bizarre speech about smart cities and a speed train. What was it?
Yes, yes.
and you could almost get a sense that okay, this seems a little bogus.
Also, where you sit as journalist on the gallery, you can also look down on the MPs in their seats and see what they're doing. So you could see Malusi Gigaba playing.
Oh yes, Candy Crush.
Candy Crush. Lamis, but last year, this time, I mean, it feels incredible. We didn't have COVID in South Africa, as far as we know. We know that the first recorded case was in March last year. And we heard about this virus in Asia, in China, that where there were reports coming out. But we were talking about things like, I looked at our headlines from last year's speech. The finance minister to give details of a state bank and a sovereign wealth fund. I mean, that feels ages ago. It didn't happen. I see State Bank has now come back on Tito Mbowene's Twitter stream, but it's really kind of dropped off the radar. Municipalities may buy power from independent producers, so that was approved last year, but it hasn't really started. Ekurhuleni gets a science and technology university. I mean, that was one of the top themes from last year. It feels a very long time ago.
Yeah, I think one of the things about Ramaphosa's presidency is that he's been very focused on reviving economic growth. I mean, some economists have pointed out that prior to 2020, in that whole decade, 2010 to 2019, economic growth had averaged less than 1%. So in 2019, I don't know if you remember, the president had also put out a list of priorities. One of them was transforming the economy. Treasury had even put out that structural reform paper. And so at the 2020 Sona, Ramaphosa sort of came with that same spirit, these are a few things that we're going to prioritize in the economy. But then I think, like as you pointed out, COVID came and we had to reprioritize and put all our resources, I guess, behind health.
And we've run out of money since.
Yeah, so things like a sovereign wealth fund really just feels like a wish list.
Yeah.
It feels like
it's like that car that you kind of saw in the car magazine, but
like
that you can
I
never
want that
afford.
one day. Because right now we were meant to use whatever money we had for masks, and then we stole that money.
Juanita, and that's no laughing matter, and we'll get there. How strong is this president in his position?
I think that what Ramaphosa had for the initial years of his presidency was goodwill and good faith in trusting his leadership, and I think that has been squandered. I think his leadership in the pandemic, the pandemic started with a decent amount of optimism and a decent amount of faith that he will do the right thing. Unfortunately, what we've seen in the last year definitely paints a very, very, very scary picture of what is to come for the country. If you look at the state of the ANC, if you look at the state of governance on all levels of governance, whether it's local government, whether it's provincial or national, it is broken. And there is an admission from the president now to say, we had these good plans in place, and we had good intentions, but okay, we didn't know it was going to get so bad. And I think that that particularly is the problem with Cyril Ramaphosa in these addresses, because if you read closely his or reflect back to the 2020 Sona, it almost felt like a motivational speech, where you trying to sort of rally people and give them hope when the tangible things that are on the table. You can't make promises. Usually in a State of the Nation address, the president can say, "I'm going to do 1, 2, and 3." How do you do that when, like you said, there's no more money? So you have no money.
You call a summit.
And then you appoint an advisory council.
And a commission of inquiry.
And then a commission of inquiry, and then
Look, we must be fair to the president. So I think if we go through this list tonight, we will see some successes. I think it will be. I think it's unfair to think he hasn't achieved anything. I think the changes at the NPA, at Eskom, at Transnet, at SARS has been vast, and we're seeing some of the fruits of that, especially in the criminal justice sector. But the economy pays the bills, and I think that's his biggest headache. And we're probably going to hear a lot about the economy tonight, and Conita, the funding of the vaccines, because that seems to have been a sticking point. COVID is still the biggest theme, and I expect him to speak a lot about COVID tonight and to defend the government's track record over the past, 10 months since COVID officially arrived in South Africa. The lockdowns that really hurt our economy but saved lives. I mean, it's scientifically been proven that it has saved lives, the fact that we had to go into a lockdown, especially in the beginning. And South Africa still being lauded internationally for having done the right thing in the beginning. But, and there's always a but, with this government, unfortunately, it has been squandered, a lot of the goodwill. And I'm certainly of the view that the vaccines procurement has been one of those instances where it seems like we dropped the ball and we were just too late. And unfortunately, tonight comes just a few days after we heard the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine that we also participated in the trials at Wits University is not going to be effective against the variant that had its origins in South Africa.
Yeah, and the thing is that Ramaphosa continues with this message that we've done the best that we could, but and trust us in this vaccine matter. But the argument that I put forward is that we trusted you with PPE procurement, and that literally fell apart. So we have this very recent example of how things could go wrong. What shows us that we're not going to have a repeat of the same thing? Besides corruption, you just saw inefficiency in government, and so already it's down to a bad start. Particularly because we got into the running quite late. Government can justify it and say we didn't have the money to just hedge our bets on vaccines that haven't been proven, and they use the argument now that look at the AstraZeneca vaccine. What if we procured more, for example, and so that's their argument. But we definitely have gotten to a bad start in that we had a terrible second wave, what our debt toll is sitting at over 40,000 at the moment, and
almost 50, yeah.
Almost 50,000. And what happens as a result is that we need vaccines. Other countries have already started rolling out started their vaccine rollout program quite successfully, and we are slow in that regard compared to other countries on the same economic status as we are. And so now we're in this sort of storm of we put our hopes in this AstraZeneca vaccine that came from the Serum Institute in India to at least start the process for healthcare workers, and that was supposed to happen February, and then the other vaccines were supposed to come, and now that has been derailed. At the same time, you're dealing with this new variant that's causing, which is more transmissible. That's what the experts are saying, and anecdotally, more severe disease.
So it's a crisis at all levels. It's a health crisis. It's an economic crisis. It's an infrastructure, social, and economic crisis. And the state is just not holding up. The centre isn't holding to support Ramaphosa in his plan to fix all of this as a president. Lamise, you and I were on a joint call with the Treasury DG Dondo Mogajane last week about the payment of the vaccines. And I mean, it was actually quite shocking that we had to sit with the Treasury just to confirm that we have money while we are bailing out things like SAA. On the other side, but I mean, what did you take home from that briefing?
I think Treasury's go-to line is, you'll find out at the budget. I think they stressed that it would be a combination of things. I know there's been talk of tax hikes. Some experts have said if there's a special COVID tax, it should only be implemented temporarily. Because we really are a highly taxed country. People are feeling the pressure. You can't raise more taxes, can you? And then there's also cost cutting. And where are they going to cut? A lot of Treasury's plans to cut expenditures linked to the public sector wage bill, and we know unions are challenging that call to freeze wage increases of last year. So we don't know if that's going to be successful, because Treasury's whole fiscal consolidation plan hangs on that public sector wage bill, and them not having to implement increases.
Do you expect big announcements on that score
I was
tonight?
just going to say, you think it's going to be bold if he says anything about it?
I think so. I mean, I don't know. I feel it's like an elephant in the room. I think it'll be an injustice not to address it, or he might say it's going to the Constitutional Court and I can't say anything. I don't know.
Use the old sub judice excuse.
My bet is on the latter, to say, yeah, it's an issue, but I'm not going to address it.
Yeah.
But would the unions be sitting tonight waiting for him to say something about that?
I think probably more budget, and I think that, but there has to be, effectively, it has to be a political decision. But it takes it takes a level of braveness to stick your head out and start a stick fight with the unions. And Ramaphosa has been very cautious in kind of making it a Tito fighting on his behalf. Yeah. But really what you need is to say there is no money, we have a health care, but then the unions are turning around and saying, okay, you don't want to give us increases, but then why is there corruption? But then there's an interesting topic in that who is enabling the corruption? And that's the civil service.
Let's pause the corruption for a second. Lamisa, I want to get back to you in the economy, because we speak about the economy sometimes almost flippantly, like, the economy has suffered so much. Just how bad has the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent effects of the lockdown, etc., been on the economy? Unemployment is over 30%. It's worse than ever before. How bad did it hit our fiscus?
Well, just to paint a picture for you, in the second quarter we shed 2 million jobs. And remember, these are people mainly in the informal sector who lost their jobs. And if you compare that to the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, like 1 million jobs were lost over a year. So, just to compare those, I think it maybe helps.
And these are
people.
mums and dads and uncles and aunts who can't put food on the table anymore for their families. So, sorry that I'm interrupting, but the extent of that is much more than the 2 million even.
Yeah, I think often when we can say numbers like, oh, the economy might contract 7%, last year. But we need to understand that these are people who have families that they need to take care of.
And in terms of the COVID-19 economic recovery, so we had the famous 500 billion rand stimulus package. Just talk us through how this package was meant to kickstart the economy, and what was that 200 billion loan scheme that was part of it that really didn't take off?
Well, I think at the time, government was thinking it's very hard on people financially. We need to cushion the blows on households. There was, I don't know if you remember this, some payment of taxes was deferred, for example. I think, there's also the TERS money paid out to people through the UIF.
I remember the SASA grant, right?
Yes, the special grant that came out of it. I think the criticism with the 500 billion isn't that it's that it's not truly 500 billion because of that 200 billion credit scheme. So those were essentially loans to be provided for people. But remember, you got to apply for the loan, and eventually you're going to have to pay back the loan. The uptake hasn't been great. As of January, only say 18 billion worth of loans has been paid out.
18 billion out of 200 billion.
Yeah.
But I suppose people are afraid in the prospects of the South African economy. You don't want to be left with that much of debt, considering that it doesn't look like the economy is going to pick up, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. Actually, the Banking Association of South Africa pointed that out. People don't want to take the risk of a loan that they might not be able to pay back. They would rather close shop now and, have those losses as opposed to extending it.
Which for me is a bit more worrying, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess we're going to have to hear from the president tonight about the economy. Yes, he will probably refer or defer to the budget many times, but he can't say nothing about the economy. South Africans are struggling, they're earning less than before. Many more people are without jobs tonight. We'll listen to the president for some kind of hope. To Mamina, give us hope, Mr. President.
No, Amy, you can't go back there.
Am I too optimistic?
Too optimistic.
On the optimistic note, let's talk about Eskom, guys. Because we've heard for the past, sure, Conita, I think from the first Sona, we heard many promises about Eskom. The main one, that Eskom was going to be split into 3. But before I remind you of those promises, let's listen to the president himself, what he had to say about Eskom in last year's State of the Nation address, and see if you also have a bit of a déjà vu feeling that I had when I heard it.
So this State of the Nation address is therefore about inclusive growth. It is about the critical actions that we need to take this year to build a capable state and place our economy on the path of recovery. This year, we fix the fundamentals. We pursue critical areas of growth, and we ensure excellence in planning and execution in government. For over a decade, South Africans have had to contend with the effects of constrained energy supply. I've spoken extensively about the critical role that Eskom plays in our economy and our country, and in the livelihoods of every South African. The load shedding of the last few months has had a debilitating effect on our country, on our economy, and on our people. It has severely set back our efforts to rebuild the economy and to create jobs. Every time it occurs, it disrupts people's lives, causing frustration, inconvenience, and hardship. At its core, load shedding is the inevitable consequence of Eskom's inability over many years, due to debt, lack of capacity, mismanagement, and state capture to service its power stations. The reality that we will need to accept is that in order for Eskom to undertake the fundamental maintenance necessary to improve the reliability of supply, load shedding, unfortunately, will remain a possibility for the immediate future.
Load shedding will remain a possibility for the immediate future. Well, that immediate future is still with us, Conita. 12 months later, load shedding may even happen tonight as we speak.
Yeah, no, Eskom is the thorn in President Cyril Ramaphosa's side and will be for the foreseeable future. I suppose a thorn in all of our side, because we don't know if we're going to go home to some electricity tonight or not.
And have to plan for a kind of cold dinner. Lamise, what is the problem with Eskom? I mean, can you tell our viewers what is it that they just can't fix, or should we cut them some slack? Are they actually busy fixing it? Let's be honest, he brought in a new top team. They fired the board, the old state-captured board. We've seen all those evidence before the Sona Commission. There's a fresh board, there's a fresh CEO and underwriter with his team. What are they up to?
Wow. I think I'm responding to questions that date back to that required answers back in 2007. Yeah, I think, okay, the reason we're having load shedding now, just the simple answer, is because Eskom needs to take units offline to conduct reliability maintenance, which takes a bit longer. The reason they're doing this is because back in the state capture years, it was neglected. So in a way, we're sort of still paying for the sins of state capture and the poor management decisions made then. Secondly,
so when Brian Molefe says, remember your second point, but when Brian Molefe says we didn't have load shedding during my term, he's talking, what's a nice word, nonsense. Because he was not fixing the power plants, basically.
Yeah, like these power plants are really old. I think sometimes we also forget that these aren't brand new. I mean, okay, it's a bit puzzling that the brand new stations like Medupi and Kusile are having breakdowns, but we also know that that's because they were design defects with them. I think we also need to understand that the state capture that happened at Eskom didn't just start under Jacob Zuma's reign. It's an institution that was set up during apartheid. It's sort of designed to enrich a select few. And we just need to start rethinking about the energy sector in general. And I think this is where the unbundling comes in. So that Eskom doesn't have to be the sole provider of generation. We need independent power producers to hop on that can also address energy security problems and introduce competitiveness in the market. Because right now, Eskom is a monopoly.
But we heard a year ago already, as we were reminded earlier, a year ago the president announced in his Sona that the municipalities would be able to buy from independent power producers. If that's not happening, do you know why not?
I feel like there's a lot of hold up in terms of regulations. I think these processes take time. I think for NERSA to grant someone a license, they can't be rushed. And I think this is also the frustration of some energy experts. On that note, I know that you don't need a license or to operate with to generate up to 1 megawatts of power. But some people are calling for it to be increased. I mean, and then think of it, we could have mines generating their own power.
And remember Ramaphosa said, I don't know if it was in the last State of the Nation, but I think in a previous State of the Nation address, that if Eskom fails, South Africa fails. Do you remember that sentiment? And it's kind of like him always acknowledging that yes, we have this crisis, but I don't know. I just feel like the solution isn't clearly pointed out.
Yeah, I want us to talk about the splitting up of Eskom, because we heard that in 2018 already, guys. This is 3 years later. Why isn't it happened? Are they boards or what's holding it up? Do we know?
Well, we do know they are the management and the boards of the three entities, generation, transmission and distribution, have been set up. I think there's also just a lot of legal issues that need to be ironed out, because part of the unbundling sort of addresses Eskom's debt problem. Eskom has debt of over 480 billion, slowly approaching $500 billion. For a healthy balance sheet, it needs to get rid of, say, 280 billion, to healthy, for Eskom to have 200 billion debt. So they're considering putting the bulk of their debt under the generation entity, but they also can't just do that because they don't want to risk defaulting on their debt or upsetting their creditors, so they need buy-in in that regard. So no real announcements have been made on that. We do know that NEDLAC, which is the partnership between government, labor and business, they've sort of committed to mobilizing resources.
The social compact.
Yes, the social compact.
So is this where using the pension funds?
Well, that's what the labor unions have put forward, but it's also very technical. They won't say it outright, yes, let's use pension fund money, but that has been put forward as an idea. So getting back to my earlier point about resource mobilization, we don't know what that means, but we know they've committed to it. And maybe the president would bring it up, or maybe he will say, Mboweni will talk about it at the budget. So.
Well, all I know is that there is load shedding and that South Africans are getting increasingly, what is that nice English word, gatvol, at load shedding, because it is just the reality of our lives now, and it's back with a vengeance. And over the past few days, I don't know about you guys, but the messages from Eskom has almost been a bit scary, like unexpected loss, stage 3, in the middle of the week. Juanita, in terms of politics and Eskom and the social compact and NEDLAC, NEDLAC has been brought back almost by Cyril Ramaphosa, obviously an old unionist from NUM, who's always believed in negotiations, bargaining, who was at the other side of the table for a long period in his life. Is NEDLAC at the center of Eskom and the future of Eskom, or is it really just a sideshow to kind of pretend that we are consulting all the parties, but actually I'm going to do what I want to do?
I think that there is this realization that Eskom is too big a problem for one person to fix, or one like just government to fix on its own. It is a massive problem. And back to that point that if it fails, we can I use the word screwed?
Yeah.
So it's not, it's not going to end well if Eskom. It's in no one's interest for Eskom to fail. And so what this does now, bringing all these parties together, is at least we can agree on a way forward. And so you're not fighting with each other on what the destination is. And so, but we haven't seen maybe it's a far reach, but I'll say it. We haven't seen a successful example of this. It's a good idea. Bring people together. Let's agree on a social compact. We know where everyone's going to, and everyone's working towards it. It's part of Ramaphosa's consultative presidency.
But unfortunately, it's a smart concept, the social compact, but nobody really knows 1, 2, 3 what it means.
Yeah.
The PIC deal has not happened. The PIC was very unhappy, or in fact, the government employees pension fund at the time, I remember a year ago, was very unhappy when Kusati started touting this plan of them taking up all the Eskom debt, because they're like, no, that's not our mandate. We actually have to invest government pensioners' money in profit-making assets.
And also, Adriaan, I think the big issue with Ramaphosa is that you don't have the luxury of time. So Eskom is literally, because you said quite correctly that there is this load shedding that people are just getting frustrated by. So in an ideal world, when a problem is sort of imminent, but we still have a little bit of time, then you can have people consulting and having tea and discussing, not when the house is burning, and I think that's the difference, and I think that's what I'd like to see in the speech tonight. From what we've seen all along is that these long-term plans in place, and you're right in a way that it's not all bad. Some of these plans have proven to be successful, but it's not immediate solutions to problems. And I think that when you are looking at a level of crisis that you see in South Africa today, whether it's the economy, whether it's politics, whether it's governance, you need immediate solutions.
I think what all South Africans are asking for is just information to be able to plan our lives for the next few years. To be honest, if we listen to the Zonda Commission and what's come out about Eskom, the place was broken. The place was gutted and captured. So I think, to be fair, it was maybe also unrealistic of us to have expected President Ramaphosa and his minister Gwede Mantashe and the CEO.
3 years. 3 years.
Well, maybe 3 years is a very short time. After 10 years of capture, you have to
3
put it out there. I think, Lamise is telling us they are fixing very old, let's stick with the car metaphor, very old Skedonk cars that they're trying to polish again and get the fan belt working again. At least, Lamise, you're leaving us with that good news on Eskom that they are fixing, right? They are fixing those power stations.
I think another ray of hope is that this CEO sort of sees the light that we need to get renewable energy on board. So he's open to what's happening globally. It's not like we're looking in this little vacuum and we're doing it this way. He's aware of what's happening out there, and I think we should, just based on the changes that have happened there in the past year, I feel like as a journalist, they're quite transparent about what their capacity is. Every day, the spokesperson puts out just a little update on his Twitter feed. This is the capacity, this is how much we needed. So there's definitely a change in transparency, which I think we should give them a little bit of credit for.
Also, very smart move by Andre de Ruyter to hire Sikunati Manchacha, the strongest critic of Eskom as a journalist, to become the spokesperson of Eskom. But Siko's doing a very good job.
But I'm not in the business of clapping for a fish just for swimming. I'm not in that business.
That's the quote of the evening. I'm not in the business of clapping for a fish for swimming. Remember that one. Lamise, SAA. Oh. Why? Is the president going to talk about SAA tonight, do you think?
I'm hopeful, just because I feel this is the longest business rescue process ever. I think South Africans do want can't be sustainable. We're waiting for this new airline. So I'm a bit hopeful that Ramaphosa will talk about the new airline. And if we can stop calling it the new airline.
Konito, have you heard the magical reason why we absolutely need SAA? I think for a lot of people, Pravin Gordhan driving this process has been a bit weird, because President Gordhan, obviously through his work in the state capture years, through fighting state capture, resisting the looting of treasury and the hunt on treasury under Jacob Zuma, has gained a reputation of someone who stands up for what is right. And people struggle, from people who I've spoken to, normal South Africans, but also analysts, struggle to put together why someone like Gordhan, who knows exactly how little money we have, in what troubles we are, I mean, in the fact that we can't even properly pay for vaccines. Do you understand the political dynamics or the security dynamics, I guess, about having an airline?
Yeah, so it's a vanity project, right? We all can agree that having a national carrier is a vanity project. But the ANC has long sustained this narrative, and it's something that we have to admit that President Gordhan has drank that Kool-Aid, in that, you know, it's a strategic interest, and having a national carrier is very important for you know, multiple reasons. But we also are in a pandemic, and so what the world was a year ago this time, in terms of aviation, is no longer the same. And so you cannot look at a national carrier the same way as you did when you see Gulf airlines that are so profitable facing the amounts of cuts, etc., that you know, despite them being a success story, right? And so I think that this, for me, proves how proves the lack of agility that this government has, and the Public Enterprise Department is just indicative of that. That you have this problem, you came up with a solution. Okay, you're going to have this business rescue plan. Okay, you're then going to have this new airline that's going to form. But the world has changed, and those principles of, you know, it's in our national interest to have this national carrier or whatever, is no longer relevant. And so the country can't just bounce back from the reality that it's not the same world.
I just want to understand the strategic importance bit. So basically what the government is saying is, if one day the Lufthansa's and the British Airways and the Emirates of the world decide they're no longer flying from here, then we basically cut off from the rest of the world.
That, number one. Number two is, so connectivity, and then also positioning South Africa as a hub for the rest of the continent. I don't know what else.
Yeah, I think Pravin Gordhan said, like, it's part of our reputation out there, getting our brand out there.
Yeah.
Well, as you correctly said, strategies have changed in 12 months, and that may maybe not be so important anymore. We're going to move to corruption, but before we talk about corruption and the absolute endemic effect it had, specifically during the past 12 months, let's listen what President Ramaphosa had to say about the Sona Commission that's at the forefront of exposing corruption and state capture.
Honorable members, we will not let up our fight against corruption and state capture. We will need to work together to root out corruption and strengthen the rule of law. We should not solicit or bribe or pay bribes or engage in corrupt acts. We should upgrade our culture of reporting crime when we see it being committed. Now, this battle can only succeed if it is taken on by the whole of society, if we build a formidable social compact of all formations. We therefore welcome the work of the Joint Government and Civil Society Working Group charged with developing a national anti-corruption strategy and implementation plan, which is close to completion of its work. We plan to launch this strategy mid-year. Now, the Zondo Commission into state capture continues with its critical work with the full support of the government and other institutions. I have received a detailed and voluminous report on the Commission of Inquiry into the Public Investment Corporation. I will make it available to the public, together with a plan on taking the findings and recommendations forward in a few days.
Quinita, the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, and you told us Deputy Judge President Raymond Zondo will be in the House tonight, has been at the center of our body politic for the past, is it 3 years now, going into 4th year. We've heard so much. We've heard just so much about what's happened, how entities were captured, the state has been captured. We've heard individuals testifying. And in the past few days, we've had renewed attacks on the being of the Zondo Commission, firstly by former President Jacob Zuma, who said he will flatly not go there, who's refusing, and who has said he will defy a constitutional court order for him to go there. And then Jessie Duarte, the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, who I thought had become a Ramaphosa supporter in recent years, changing her colours to the wind. What's going on?
I think that the reality of what's going to come is dawning for many people, and that's that there is no way Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo cannot implicate the ANC in state capture. And because we've seen it over and over and over again in the testimony before the commission that the ANC, how the ANC enabled the wanton looting of this of state funds and the breaking down of state entities, right? And so I think that as the commission, tries to wrap up its work, we know that the Deputy Chief Justice has asked for an extension, but effectively it's now the last phase of the commission's work. There's a very, very real reality that the truth of all of it is going to be compiled in this report. I don't know how many pages it's going to be, probably like 1 million.
Very long.
And I think that's what's making people panic. And you see a level of panic that you've never seen before from Jacob Zuma, because he has to now answer, because he cooperated with the Zondo Commission before, where he went there and spoke a whole lot of nonsense.
Interesting things. But he can no longer remain silent on a question unless he admits that it's implicating him in crime. I thought that was such a clever judgment by the Constitutional Court.
Absolutely. But now what the Zondo Commission wants from him is, okay, what happened in this regard, the specifics,
Yes.
and that was going to sort of pin down Jacob Zuma's role as the architect of state
Yes.
capture, because you cannot forget the findings of Thuli Madonsela that led to the establishment of this commission.
Yes.
He's now decided, okay, I'm not going to cooperate with this commission. He first tried to, sort of claim that Zondo was biased, and then you saw also Jessie Duarte now say, kind of trying to form this momentum that, oh, this is an attack on the ANC, and Trevor Manuel responded very cleverly, where he said that that it's almost corruption was never,
ANC policy.
ANC policy. And so if you think that this is an attack on the ANC, then effectively you are conceding that the ANC has become about corruption.
And this is the conflict that Cyril Ramaphosa faces. This is a perfect example. Because he has to keep a Jessie Duarte happy and close and inside the so-called proverbial tent. But he also has to leave Judge Zondo to do what he needs to do and finish his commission and write his 1 million page report.
Yeah, and I think that what the stance that Ramaphosa has taken in terms of corruption is toothless biting, right? So he bites, but it's not consequential, and you see it in terms of the makeup of his executive. You see it in relation to people who serve in high positions in his administration, and so yes, you'll have the random, So he, for example, he dealt with Tom Moyane, for example, but he didn't deal with Arthur Fraser. And there's been evidence before the Zondo Commission in that regard. We have, for a long time, in the question of corruption, have given President Cyril Ramaphosa the benefit of the doubt. But when you look at what happened last year in terms of PPE, he was warned about it. And he said, we're putting preemptive measures in place, and then now says, oopsie, we didn't know, how bad the hyenas were gonna, sort of maul the public funds and eat,
I mean, the corruption is so entrenched in procurement systems in South Africa. You have to,
and in the existence of the ANC too.
You have to physically change the whole thing of how you procure. But Lamise, it has been a good year for the president. I think you will refer to it tonight. We've seen arrests. I mean, we've been asking for arrests. Wait, just hear me out. We've asked for arrests for many years, from 2018. I mean, the last proper corruption case we had in this country was Jackie Selebi in 2010. This is 2021, but in the past 12 months, we've seen the arrest of Ace Magashule, the Secretary General of the ANC. That's no small matter. It's a big, big moment. We've seen the arrest of people like Vincent Smith, former ANC MP on the Bosasa case. We've seen the arrest of Edwin Sodi in the Free State asbestos case and others. And the ID inside the NPA is promising there's more arrests coming. There was those 2 weeks where we just had arrests every day. It almost felt like the days of the Scorpions. Surely Ramaphosa will try and take some credit for that tonight.
Okay, you are more optimistic than I am, but I do concur with you in that the years of sort of rebuilding organizations have been paying off in some regards. SARS is a good example, and you can speak to that, Lemise. And for example, the NPA, at the moment, the NPA is probably in the best form that it has been in the last maybe decade and a half, right? And so you can only see good things to come from that. But I also feel like if we clap too hard, we're going to lose focus from the mammoth task that is at hand. That 5 arrests of top politicians is not enough, and arrests also signify nothing in the grander scheme of things, because people have, there was Estina arrest and that had, that fell through.
But that case was under the old NPA, to be fair.
I get your optimism. I'm kind of leaning towards it, but I just like to be a bit cautious in that regard. That yes, the Ramaphosa cannot take credit for arrests, right? Because he has nothing to, and if he does, it's quite dangerous, right? But it's the manifestation of the work in rebuilding criminal justice system, which I think can be a win in his.
That's
in
a very
his
good point you're making, because as much as he has always been saying, I am not the one who must arrest the crooks, he also can't be taking credit for the arrest that's been made. So we'll have to check him closely on that. Lemise, do you want to quickly say something about SARS and what's happening under Edward Kieswetter?
Yeah, I think now that, it's good that we're getting all this evidence being brought before the State Capture Commission, but I think the real work now is rebuilding institutions. SARS is one of them. Last year, the Edward Kieswetter briefed Parliament just about their situation. They really are trying to recapacitate themselves, but just under the years of state capture, they've lost key staff with skills required to clamp down on things like illicit trade, people sending money offshore. I don't know, I'm not qualified to do that. So this is why it's so important that the president also maybe even talks about them getting funding to capacitate themselves. I think Kieswetter said currently they're only being allocated 10 billion. They need something like 14 billion. We've already seen such a major difference with him having to reestablish the large business center. And that's focused on, corporate income tax, getting collections there. I think also just on a fiscal note, it might be good news. I know last year Treasury had said we have 300 billion tax shortfall. But recent stats coming out shows that that shortfall might be 100 billion less. And I think a lot of it has to do with, SARS clamping down on people who are non-compliant. And tax is such an important story because, if we need enough revenues to provide basic services.
Yeah, it's the only income we have.
Otherwise we're going to have to borrow.
Yeah.
And right now our debt service costs are really expensive, and most of the money that we are getting is going toward, most of it is going towards debt servicing costs. I think SARS should really be up in, on a priority list. Some economists have even said it should be considered investments into SARS when you put money into it.
Maybe more strategic than an airline?
Not as glamorous, but you're right in that it has to be the priority, because if you look at what are your options, where are you going to get foreign direct investment from? Ramaphosa, often referred to, having these investment conferences and these investment drives and having these investment envoys. Where are you going to get foreign direct investment in the middle of a pandemic to the tune of what you need it to be, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is local investment in our economy is it's not looking great, and so you really need every last tax cent that you can get, considering that you have this ballooning list of expenditure that you just need to constantly throw at. And I think that I think that will come out in the speech, because I think there is a realization that if you don't fix SARS, where else are you going to get money from?
It's 10 minutes before President Ramaphosa delivers his 5th State of the Nation address. Stay with us. We are wrapping up our pre-Sona analysis, checking in on this, almost said Zuma presidency. It felt so long ago. The Ramaphosa presidency, what he has achieved and what he has not achieved. And then get something cool for the throat before the president starts. I'm referring to a glass of water, of course, before load shedding kicks in. Quinita, we have to talk about the opposition.
Yes.
They're also a factor in our lives, and they all normally factor and perform during this night of Sona. There'll be some opposition leaders tonight, I guess, in the House and also on the call. But before we talk about specifically the DA and the EFF, let's listen to what DA leader John Steenhuisen, who is a new DA leader, had to say about what he would have said if he was the president tonight.
That we are a nation in crisis on 3 fronts. Firstly, we're in a COVID crisis, from which the only way out is the immediate rollout of a massive vaccination program. Secondly, we're in an economic crisis, and here the only way out is a raft of urgent, bold and brave economic reforms. And thirdly, we're in a crisis of democracy, as the recent shocking testimony at the Zondo Commission has revealed. And the only immediate way out of this crisis, if we're brutally honest, is for our government to resign in shame. However, we can say with near certainty that none of these 3 things is going to happen right away. While we're still waiting for a full detailed vaccination plan from the president, we do know that we won't have nearly enough vaccines in time to prevent a 3rd and possibly a 4th wave of the virus from running through our country. This leaves the prospect of further lockdowns looming over our already shattered economy. That will most certainly bring on a sovereign debt crisis, along with another wave of job losses and extraordinary human suffering and deprivation. We know that almost everything the president said about his government's efforts to procure vaccines has been a distortion of the truth, to create the impression that they've been busy for the past 6 months, while in reality, they only woke up in January. We already knew this from statements made by the vaccine suppliers themselves, but this was confirmed in a letter from the Department of Health to Treasury, in which it requested a deviation from the normal procurement procedures in order to acquire vaccines. That letter was only sent on the 7th of January this year. When the president spoke in his televised address about the arrival of the various different vaccines, he deliberately kept the details vague by simply stating when the delivery of each vaccine was expected to commence. What he didn't tell us is how many of these vaccines would arrive on these commencement dates. However, those details were contained in a presentation made by the health minister to cabinet, which shows very clearly that the bulk of these vaccines will only be arriving in October, November, and December this year, with some even only getting here next year. So, when the president tells us of plans to vaccinate 2/3 of the population by the end of the year, even if we could launch a program that could target in excess of 100,000 vaccine shots a day, we simply won't have the vaccines to cover even half of that target. Now, this is not because all those other big bad countries hoarded the vaccines so we couldn't buy them, as President Ramaphosa tried to spin when speaking to the World Economic Forum crowd. It's because we were simply nowhere when they were all queuing back in May, June and July 2020. The failure to procure vaccines when they were available to us and the failure to publish a detailed and transparent rollout plan are a violation of government's constitutional obligations. We have asked the High Court to compel government to make public all their dealings with vaccine suppliers, as well as their rollout plan, as they had to do 20 years ago when the Treatment Action Campaign took them to court to get clarity on their antiretroviral plan. It is critical that we get our country's vaccination program on track as soon as we can. we now have an enormous amount of lost ground to make up, some of which some other countries will be looking to wrap up their vaccination programs as South Africa is only getting started. We don't have a choice but to try and make up this ground because we have no time to waste in opening up our economy so that we can start to reverse our massive job losses.
Quinita, that was John Steenhuisen, the new leader of the DA. A year ago, he was the chief whip. His fortunes has changed. How has he performed over the past few months?
I think that the opposition in general have been on the back foot, and it's quite surprising, particularly because there's been so many blunders by the current administration. You would expect them to flourish. Obviously, they've relied a lot on their court cases, some of which they lost, some of which they won, in trying to keep government accountable. But there has been a disaster, a state of a national disaster, and so the accountability from Parliament has been quite minimal, and so the DA particularly have relied on their approach to sort of just oppose. And I think that in a pandemic where things are a little bit more nuanced, even the vaccine issue, there is no sort of right and wrong in this particular matter, as much as we like it to be. And I think you'll get that nuance a little bit from Ramaphosa tonight, in that it's really a complicated situation. Whether you talk about the economy, whether you talk about the global health response to this pandemic.
But that is Steenhuisen's style. He's clearly decided that he's going to be the combative Tony Leon style leader for the DA. And that was after the Musi Maimane years, where the DA reached their biggest electoral percentages ever, but also saw a big drop at the national election in 2019. In fact, we're going into local government elections this year. And that was the pinnacle of the DA's politics. It may have been in 2016 when they got the most votes in Johannesburg, Pretoria, and the Nelson Mandela Bay, and took control of those three cities, all of which they've lost. No, in fact, they've still got control over Tshwane. Where is the DA today going into this election? Yeah,
I think the DA is definitely on a back foot, and it has to do with multiple reasons, particularly their own leadership battles and the factionalism within the DA. The second thing is obviously their public positioning about issues around transformation and race, which obviously is a massive issue. And the third thing is just their stance in the pandemic, where they sort of supported Ramaphosa, then opposed him, and so they definitely have it has been tough on opposition in general. Yes, the pandemic has been tough for the ANC.
You can't have rallies, you can't go out.
Absolutely, and I think that we're going to see the consequences of that in the local government elections.
If the same story, they have almost disappeared from the radar for a long time during the pandemic, then kind of had these like 2 or 3 waves where they came back.
Sure.
The Brackenfell incident, I remember well, and other things, the Tea Party. What's happening with Julius Malema and his party? I think
what he's proving to do is that he obviously is trying to be just sort of ignore Ramaphosa, and you see tonight where they're not present. You're not seeing that very visible red overalls and hard hats in the assembly.
I'm gonna have to leave it there. Quinita Hunt, Lamise Omaji colleague, thank you so much, guys, for talking to us. We're now going to listen to President Ramaphosa's State of the Nation, his 5th one, 2021. Please stay with us. Come back afterwards for some post-Sona analysis.
Of the National Assembly, members of the National Council of Provinces, the Dean of the European Union region representing the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished guests and members and fellow South Africans. On this day, 31 years ago, President Nelson Mandela walked out of the gates of Victor Verster prison, a free person, a living embodiment of the resilience and courage of the people of South Africa. His release signaled great hope of better things to come. It actually signaled that the freedom of the people of South Africa was nigh. For nearly 40 million years, an extraordinary ecosystem has existed here at the southernmost tip of our continent. The fynbos, which stretches across the Cape, has among the most distinctive features of any plants that are found on our earth. It can adapt to dry and hot summers and cold and rainy winters. It is wondrous in its diversity. Our national flower, the protea, is a species of the fynbos. When I opened the 3rd National Investment Conference last year, I spoke of the protea's unique properties that in so many ways resembles our national character as South Africans. What is most unique and special about the fynbos that we find plentiful here in the Western Cape is that to be sustainable and to survive, the fynbos needs fire. At least once every 20 years, the fynbos must burn at extremely high temperatures to allow the ecosystem to be rejuvenated and to grow afresh. Throughout the summer, the burnt foliage of the fynbos lies desolate, but when the autumn rains return, the seeds explode and germinate, and its life cycle begins all over again. And it displays the splendor and the beauty that we often see when we look at the beautiful sights of the Western Cape. The mountains bloom with new life as plants which once seemed lost and dead grow back even stronger than ever before. We, the people of South Africa, have over the past year experienced a terrible tragedy and hardship. Like a wildfire that sweeps across the mountains and the mountainous ranges of our country, where the fynbos grows, a deadly pandemic has swept across the world, leaving devastation in its path. And yet, like the hardy fynbos of our native land, we too have proven to be resilient in many, many ways. For three centuries, we were victims as a people of oppression, dispossession, and injustice. And for 3 centuries, we resisted this. The flames of injustice may have scarred us, but they did not consume us or destroy us. The rains of democracy brought rejuvenation to our country, and they also brought the birth of a new nation. We have risen time and time again from the depths of darkness to herald a new dawn and a new day. As we look on the grave damage that this disease, coronavirus, has caused, we know that, like the fynbos, like all those who have walked this land before us, we will rise again. Nearly a year has passed since South Africa saw the first case of the novel coronavirus, COVID-19. Since then, nearly 1.5 million people in our country are known to have been infected with the virus. More than 45,000 people are known to have died. Beyond these statistics lies a human story of tragedy and a human story of pain. There is no family, no community in our land, and no place of work that has not lost someone they knew, someone they worked with, and someone that they loved. It is also a story of courage and resilience. The resilience of the hospital worker who day after day, night after night, goes to work to save lives, knowing that they themselves are at risk of infection. It is a wonderful account of the courage of the police officer, the soldier, the essential worker, the caregiver, and all those on the front line who have kept our country safe, our people fed, and our economy going. It is a story of solidarity, and it is also a story of compassion, of a nation that has stood together to confront COVID-19 in ways not seen since the early days of our democracy. Along the way, as we were struggling with this virus, yes, mistakes were made. Yes, there was a lot of criticism, and it continues. But the fact of the matter is, we, the people of South Africa, have in the main stood together to fight this common enemy. More than anything else, this crisis has revealed the true character of our remarkable nation. It has revealed a spirit of the people who refused to be defeated by a virus. It is this South African spirit that must drive our resolve to build a new and more equal economy and a better and more just society. The year ahead must be a time for change, for progress, and also for rebirth. It must be a year in which we rise as a people and we do things that are going to make us rise. This is no ordinary year, and this is no ordinary State of the Nation address. I will therefore focus this evening on the foremost overriding priorities that we have for 2021. They are not many, but they are focused. First, we must defeat the coronavirus pandemic. That is primary in everything that we have to do as a nation. And second, we must accelerate our economic recovery. Third, we must implement economic reforms to create sustainable jobs and drive inclusive growth. And finally, and not leaving many other things aside, but these are the key ones. And finally, we must fight corruption and strengthen the state that has been weakened. In the coming weeks, we will address other important elements of the government's program for the year as we move on. Fundamental to our nation's recovery is an unrelenting and comprehensive response to overcome the virus. South Africa has just emerged from the second wave of infections since COVID-19 arrived in our shores in March of last year. Driven by a new variant of the virus, this second wave was more severe and it cost many more lives than the first wave. Nevertheless, the human cost could have been far greater had we not moved quickly to restrict movement as well as activity, had we not prepared our health facilities, and had South Africans not observed the basic protocols of health, the devastation caused by the virus could have been far, far worse. This year, we must do everything in our means to contain and overcome the pandemic. This means intensifying our prevention, all the prevention efforts, and strengthening our health system. It also means that we must undertake a massive vaccination program to save lives and dramatically reduce infections across the entire population. Earlier this week, we were informed that one of the vaccines that we had procured, the AstraZeneca vaccine, offers minimal protection from mild to moderate infection by the new variant known as 501Y.V2. This is according to early findings of a study by our scientists and researchers. We really have outstanding scientists in our country. We applaud them for leading this research and providing new evidence that is vital for guiding our response to this pandemic. Since this variant is now the dominant variant in our country, these findings have significant implications for the pace, the design, as well as the sequencing of our vaccination program. While it should not delay the start of the vaccination program by much, it will affect the choice of vaccines and the manner of their deployment. The first phase of our vaccination program, which is targeted at health and other frontline workers, will now use the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which has been shown to be effective against 501Y. We have secured 9 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The first batch of some 80,000 doses will arrive in the country next week. Further consignments will arrive over the next 4 weeks, totaling 500,000 Johnson & Johnson vaccines. All provinces have already rolled out their plans to enable the first vaccines to be administered. The Deputy President, David Mabuza, is leading an interministerial committee that is overseeing this massive rollout. I wish to thank our provinces for their level of preparedness for this massive undertaking that we are about to embark upon. In addition, we have 12 million vaccines from the COVAX facility. This will be complementing other vaccines that are available to South Africa through the African Union's Acquisition Task Team facility that we set up. Pfizer has committed 20 million vaccine doses, commencing with deliveries at the end of the first quarter. We are continuing our engagement with all vaccine manufacturers to ensure that we secure sufficient quantities of vaccines that are suitable for our conditions in terms of the variant that we have here. The health and safety of our people remains our paramount concern. All medication imported in South Africa are monitored, they are evaluated, they are investigated and inspected and registered by the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. We will continue to use the science-driven approach that has served us so well since the earliest days of the pandemic. The success of the vaccination program will rely on active collaboration between all sectors of society. We are greatly encouraged by the active involvement of business, labor, health, industry players, as well as medical aid schemes, and in particular, in preparing for the mass vaccination drive that they've been involved in. As we have overcome before, we will overcome this challenge once again, and we will rise. But it is not just this disease that we must defeat. We must overcome poverty, hunger, joblessness, and the inequality in our country. We must overcome a legacy of exclusion and dispossession that continues to impoverish our people and which this pandemic has severely worsened. When I delivered the State of the Nation address in this House last year, none of us could have imagined how within a matter of weeks, our country and our world would have changed so dramatically. Our plans had to be adapted in response to a global emergency. The budgets that we had crafted had to be reprioritized, and many programs that we had as government in our various departments, including in our provinces and our local government structures, had to be deferred. Over the past year, South Africa has experienced a sharp decline in growth and a significant increase in unemployment. Poverty is on the rise, inequality is deepening. In the third quarter of 2020, our economy was 6% smaller than it was in the last quarter of 2019. There were 1.7 million fewer people employed in the third quarter of 2020 than there were in the first quarter before the pandemic struck. Our unemployment rate now stands at a staggering 30.8%. As a result of the relief measures that we implemented and the phased reopening of the economy, we expect to see a strong recovery in employment by the end of the year. As we work to contain the spread of the virus, we also had to take extraordinary measures to support ordinary South Africans. We also had to assist businesses that were in distress and protect people's livelihoods. The social and economic relief package that we introduced in April of last year is by any accounts the largest intervention of its kind in the history of our country. It identified measures worth a total of 500 billion, or about 10% of our GDP, to provide cash directly to the poorest households, to provide wage support to workers, and to provide various forms of relief to struggling businesses. This had never been done in the history of our country. A total of 18 million people, or close to 1/3 of our population, received additional grant payments through these relief measures. It is estimated that this grant lifted more than 5 million people above the food poverty line, helping to alleviate hunger in a moment of great distress and crisis. To date, more than 57 billion in wage support has been paid to over 4.5 million workers through the special UIF TERF scheme. More than 1.3 billion has been provided in support, mainly for small and medium enterprises. In addition, over 70 billion rand in tax relief was extended to businesses in distress. Around 18 billion rand in loans have been approved for 13,000 businesses through the loan guarantee scheme that we put together. So fellow South Africans, it is nearly 4 months since I stood here before the joint sitting of this parliament to present to the nation the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. This evening, we stand here not to make promises, but to report on the progress in the implementation of the recovery plan, and also the priority actions that we need to take to restore growth and to create jobs. Since the launch of the plan, we have focused on 4 priority interventions: a massive rollout of infrastructure throughout the country, a massive increase in local production, and employment stimulus to create jobs and support livelihoods, and the rapid expansion of our energy generation capacity. We announced that we would be embarking on a massive rollout of infrastructure throughout the country. We knew that to achieve this objective, we would need to steadily rebuild the technical skills within government to prepare and to manage large infrastructure projects. These were skills that had been lost over time. We have now developed an infrastructure investment program or project pipeline that is worth 340 billion rand in network industries such as energy, water, transport, as well as telecommunications. Construction has already started and progress is being made on a number of these projects. Since the announcement of the Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, we have launched 2 major human settlement projects that will provide homes to almost 68,000 households here in Gauteng. Well, not here in Gauteng in the north. Similar human settlement projects are planned all over the country in a number of other provinces. 2 years ago, I spoke about the dream of building new cities that will enable us to make a decisive break with apartheid special development. Many people laughed. Many scoffed the idea of new post-apartheid cities are being conceptualized in a number of places in our country, in a number of provinces. The Lanseria Smart City, the first new city to be built in a democratic South Africa, is now a reality in the making. The draft master plan for this smart city, which will become home to between 350,000 to 500,000 people within the next decade, was completed in November 2020 and is now out for public comment. This is reality. It is happening as we speak. And we now have a number of local government structures cooperating to build this city. Progress is being made on several major water infrastructure projects. These include phase 2 of the Mogolo and Crocodile River project and the Nkomazi water project as well. The infrastructure investment plan identifies roads and projects worth 19 billion rand covering the spine of the South African road network. Work is underway to finalize project finance and structuring for these projects. Resources have been committed from the fiscus to support the construction and rehabilitation of the major N1, N2, and N3 highways. These infrastructure projects will lead to the revival of our construction industry and the creation of much needed jobs. The 100 billion infrastructure fund is now in full operation. This fund will blend resources from the fiscal and financing from the private sector and development institutions. Its approved project pipeline for 2021 is varied and includes projects such as student housing infrastructure, which aims to provide 300,000 student beds. Another approved project is SA Connect, a program to roll out broadband to schools, hospitals, police stations, and other government facilities. The second priority intervention of the recovery plan is to support the massive increase in local production and to make South African exports globally competitive. This will encourage greater investment by the private sector in productive activity. And key to this plan is the renewed commitment from government, business, and organized labor to buy locally made products. And we've always been talking about localization and saying we encourage South Africans to buy local, to ensure that even what you wear, like the suit I'm wearing tonight, is locally made by South African workers. This commitment should lead to increased local production, which will lead to the revival of our manufacturing industry, which will lead to the employment of more and more of our people. If many of us men buy the suits that are made locally, more workers will be employed in the factories that make this suit. All social partners who participated in the development of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan as part of our social compact have agreed to work together to reduce our reliance on imports by 20% over the next 5 years. They have identified 42 products ranging from edible oils to furniture to fruit concentrates to personal protective equipment, steel products, and green economy inputs that can be sourced locally, because if we focus our mind on buying local, entrepreneurs will start making them, and entrepreneurs will start exporting them and competing with the rest of the world. But it should start here at home with us. If we achieve our target, we will significantly expand our productive economy, potentially returning more than 200 billion rand to the country's annual output. Last year, we undertook to create a larger market for small business and designate 1,000 locally produced products that must be procured from small, medium enterprises. As the COVID-19 pandemic forced the closure of global value chains, we have been able to speed up the initiative as the local supply chains become more open for locally manufactured products. To this end, Cabinet approved the Small Medium Enterprise Focused Localization Policy Framework, which identified 1,000 products. Furthermore, the Department of Small Business Development and Trade and Industry and Competition are supporting small and medium enterprises to access larger domestic and international markets. I've been very impressed with the work that these two departments have been doing. These efforts are supported by robust manufacturing support programs, In the State of the Nation address last year, I said that our vision for industrialization is underpinned by sector master plans to rejuvenate and grow key industries. 4 master plans that have been completed and signed to date, which are part of the social compact between labor, business, and government and communities, have already had an impact in their respective industries. Through the implementation of the poultry master plan, and remember, our poultry industry was under a lot of stress. What the poultry industry needed was to have a master plan, which should have been arrived at, and it did happen on a compact basis. Now we're seeing progress in that industry. The industry has now invested 800 million rand to upgrade production. South Africa now produces an additional 1 million chickens every week. Now that is great progress. The sugar master plan was signed during the lockdown with a commitment from large users of sugar to procure at least 80% of their sugar needs from local growers. Now, through the implementation of the plan last year, we saw a rise in local production and a decline in imported sugar, creating stability for an industry which employs well over 85,000 workers. Support for Black small-scale farmers is being stepped up, with a large beverage producer committing to expand their procurement sharply and focusing on the small, medium enterprise producers. Now, since the signing of the clothing, textile, footwear, and leather master plan in November in 2019, the industry has invested more than R500 million to expand local manufacturing facilities, including small, medium enterprises. We have worked closely with the auto sector to help it weather the pandemic. By the end of the year, the sector had recovered around 70% of its normal annual production in difficult circumstances. Last week, the Ford Motor Company announced a 16 billion rand investment to expand their manufacturing facility in Tshwane for the next generation Ford Ranger Bakkie, which they will export around the world to well over 150 countries. Now, this investment will support the growth of around 12 and more small, medium enterprises in the automotive component manufacturing, an area in which many Black-owned small businesses have never really entered. Now, through this initiative and this investment, we are going to see a number of small, medium enterprises, largely in the Pretoria area, Mamelodi, Easterus, and places like that, coming to the fore and becoming active and being productive. Nearly half of the procurement spend on construction of the bulk earthworks and top structure of the Tshwane Special Economic Zone during this phase is expected to be allocated to small, medium enterprises. And I was told that it will be some 200 medium enterprises, and the value could well be something like 1.7 billion rand in procurement opportunities. Toyota has invested in their KwaZulu-Natal facility to start production of the first generation hybrid electric vehicles to come off a South African assembly line. Now, this follows investment announcements by Nissan, Mercedes-Benz, and Isuzu in expanded production facilities, all of which cement South Africa's position as a global player in auto manufacturing and the biggest on the African continent. This year, our focus will be on getting the industry back to full production, implementing the Black Industrialist Fund, and working on a new platform for expanded auto trade with the rest of the continent. Now, a number of countries on our continent are already setting up their own auto manufacturing plants, but they are going to be relying on South Africa to supply them with various components and a whole lot of other products that go into building cars. Now, this will be the part of our concerted effort to boost our manufacturing sector, which has been going down. This year, we will begin to harness the opportunities presented by the African Continental Free Trade Area, which came into operation on the 1st of January following the adoption of the Johannesburg Declaration by the African Union. The AFCFTA provides a platform for South African businesses to expand into markets across the continent and for South Africa to position herself as a gateway to the continent. To address the deep inequalities in our society, we must accelerate the implementation of broad-based Black economic empowerment policies on ownership, on control and management of our economy. That is a policy that must be implemented, and there is no reversal on that policy whatsoever. Last year, government agreed to landmark deals with companies that will advance Black economic empowerment by transferring ownership to their workers. In November last year, we held our third South African Investment Conference to review the implementation of previous commitments and to generate new investment into our economy. Even under the difficult economic circumstances, the investment conference managed to raise 108 billion rand in additional investment commitments from a number of investors. Together with investment commitment confirmed from the two previous investment conferences, we've now received 773 billion in investment commitments towards our 5-year target of 1.2 trillion rand. This is phenomenally successful. Firms have reported that some 183 billion of these investments has already flowed into projects that benefit the South African economy. This shows that our country is still an attractive investment destination for both local and offshore companies. We have worked to facilitate investment by increasing the ease of doing business, including by making it easier to start a business. This is one area that had slipped backwards, and we've been doing quite a lot of work to ensure that the ease of doing business is boosted so that investors, business people can easily come to our country, set up companies, and start business. In the past year, more than 125,000 new companies have been registered through the BIS portal platform, completing their registration in just a matter of hours from the comfort of their homes or their offices. And now it happens just like that in a flash. We are making it easier for business to do business. Our third priority intervention is an employment stimulus to create jobs and to support livelihoods. The largest number of jobs obviously will be created by the private sector in a number of industries as the economy recovers. So the private sector remains the primary and the biggest creator of jobs. And it is for this reason that we've embarked on massive reforms so that the private sector can continue investing in our country. We continue to work in a social compact with the private sector to create more conducive environments for them to be able to create jobs. Our compact with the private sector, underpinned by a clear commitment to grow our economy and to create jobs. However, the public sector also has a responsibility to stimulate job creation, both through its policies and through direct job creation opportunities. The presidential employment stimulus is one of the most significant expansions of public and social employment in South Africa's history. By the end of January 2021, over 430,000 opportunities have already been supported through the stimulus. Now, a further 180,000 opportunities are currently in the recruitment process. These opportunities are in areas like education, the arts, film, and so forth, and culture, global business services, early childhood development, and small-scale and subsistence farming. It also involves environmental programs such as the clearing of alien trees, the wetland rehabilitation, fire protection and prevention, as well as cleaning and greening across our municipalities. These programs are about real lives and real livelihoods. Nearly 500,000 people are now receiving an income, developing new skills, and contributing to their community and to the country's economy. This is no small feat. It means something is being done. We will continue to support employment for as long as it is necessary while the labor market recovers, even as we work to promote stronger and more resilient growth in the private sector. So we see a symbiotic relationship between the public sector and the private sector. The private sector will create the greatest bulk of jobs. But at the same time, at the public sector level, it is essential that, yes, we also focus on what happens in our schools, what happens on the social economy side, and all these matters are being attended to. In the State of the Nation address last year, in response to the huge challenge our country faces with regards to youth unemployment, I announced that the National Youth Development Agency and the Department of Small Business Development would provide grant funding and business support to 1,000 young entrepreneurs within 100 days. While the program had to be put on hold due to the coronavirus, it nevertheless managed to reach its target of 1,000 youth businesses by International Youth Day on the 12th of August 2020. And we applaud the young people of our country who are running this program. This provides a firm foundation for our efforts to support 15,000 startups by 2024. Last year, we said we would establish a national pathway management network to provide support and opportunities to young people across the country. I want to encourage every young South African to join the more than 1.2 million people who are already in the network and take their next steps to a better future. On the many hardships, our people had to experience last year, schooling disruption placed a huge burden on learners, on teachers, and also on families. Despite this, they persevered, It is our priority for this year to regain lost time and improve educational outcomes from the early years through to high school and post-school education and training. The fourth priority that I'd like to talk about of the recovery plan is to rapidly expand energy generation capacity in our country. Now, restoring Eskom to operational and financial health and accelerating its reconstruction process is central to the work that we have to do. Eskom has been restructured into 3 separate entities for generation, transmission, and distribution. This will lay the foundation for an efficient, modern, and competitive energy system in South Africa. Eskom is making substantial progress with its intensive maintenance and operational excellence programs to improve the reliability of its coal fleet. We are working closely with Eskom on proposal to improve its financial position, to manage its debt, and reduce its dependence on the fiscus. This requires a review of the tariff path to ensure that it reflects all the reasonable costs and measures to resolve the problem of municipal debt as well. In December 2020, government and its social partners signed the historic Eskom Social Compact, which outlines the necessary actions we must take collectively and as individual constituencies to meet the country's energy needs now and into the future. Now, over the last year, we've taken action to urgently and substantially increase generation capacity in addition to what Eskom generates. The Department of Mineral Resources and Energy will soon be announcing the successful bids for 2,000 megawatts of emergency power that our country needs. The necessary regulations have been amended and the requirements clarified for municipalities to buy power from independent power producers. Systems are being put in place to support qualifying municipalities. Government will soon be initiating the procurement of an additional 11,800 megawatts of power from renewable energy, natural gas, battery storage, and coal in line with the Integrated Resource Plan of 2019. Despite this work, Eskom estimates that without additional capacity, there will be an electricity supply shortfall of between 4,000 and 6,000 megawatts over the next 5 years, as our old coal-fired power stations reach the end of their life. As part of the measures to address this shortfall, we will, in the coming weeks, issue a request for proposals for 2,600 megawatts from wind and solar energy as part of bid window 5. This will be followed by another bid window in August of 2021. Now, recent analysis suggests that easing licensing requirements for new embedded generation projects could unlock up to 5,000 megawatts of additional capacity and also help to ease the impact of load shedding. We will therefore amend Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulation Act within the next 3 months to increase the licensing threshold for embedded generation. This will include consultation amongst key role players on the level at which the new threshold should be set and the finalization of the necessary enabling frameworks. Eskom has already started work to expedite its commercial and technical processes to allow this additional capacity onto the grid within undue delays. There have been complaints that the time that they take to process these has been far too long. It's now been agreed that they are going to do it much quicker. Now, as we mobilize all the resources at our disposal to support economic recovery, we cannot lose sight of the threat that climate change poses to our environmental health, socio-economic development, and economic growth. We are therefore working to fulfill our commitments under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, which include the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Eskom, our largest greenhouse gas emitter, has committed in principle to net zero emission by 2050 and to increase its renewable capacity. So Eskom will be looking to partner with investors to repurpose and to repower part of its coal fleet. This will be done in a way that will stimulate investment, that will also stimulate local economic activity, as well as local manufacturing, as part of the just transition that will need to take care of the people who work in those power stations, the people who work in the towns where power stations reside. Our work on climate change will be guided by the Presidential Coordinating Commission on Climate Change, which is meeting for the first time this month. The Commission will work on a plan for a just transition to a low-carbon economy and climate-resilient society. We will not achieve higher rates of growth and employment if we do not implement structural economic reforms. These reforms are necessary to reduce costs and barriers to entry into our economy. They are necessary also to increase competition, to stimulate new investment. They are also necessary to create space for new entrants into the market. This work is being driven through Operation Vulindlela, which involves a team of National Treasury and the President's Office. Operation Vulindlela is focusing on reforms in the electricity, water, telecommunications, and transport sectors, as well as reforms to our visa and immigration regime. The completion of digital migration is vital to our ability to effectively harness the enormous opportunities that are presented by technological change that is just going on around the world. After many delays, we will begin the phased switch off of our analog TV transmitters from next month. It is anticipated that this process, which will be done province by province, will be completed by the end of March in 2022. The process for the licensing of high-speed spectrum is at an advanced stage. We hope that the ongoing litigation amongst interested parties on the licensing matter will provide certainty and will not unduly delay the spectrum auction process that we've decided on. In the water sector, we are working through Operation Vulindlela to ensure that water licenses are finalized within the revised time frame of 90 days and to revive the green drop and blue drop programs to strengthen water quality monitoring in our country. Now, we will finalize and implement the revised raw water pricing strategy and accelerate the establishment of a national water resource infrastructure agency. I firmly believe that if we really do want to resolve our water challenges, we need an agency that will be focused just on ensuring that water is treated with the importance and the sensitivity that it requires. Many of our people are struggling. They cry out for water on an ongoing basis. Now, establishing a water agency will be one of the better ways to resolve these challenges so that the agency can have a globular look at the water needs of the country and address those challenges. Our ability to compete in global markets depends on the efficiency of our ports and rail network. We are repositioning Durban as the hub port for the Southern Hemisphere and developing Ngqura as the container terminal of choice. The rail corridor from Gauteng is being extended to enable the export of vehicles through Port Elizabeth. These are crucial steps to move freight from road to rail and increase the competitiveness of the rail system in our country. Now, work is underway with the relevant departments to reform our visa immigration regime to attract skills and to grow the tourism sector. As international travel starts to recover in the wake of COVID-19, we will undertake a full rollout of e-visas to visitors from China, India, Nigeria, Kenya, and 10 other countries in the world. Now, the revised list of critical skills will be published for public comment by the Department of Home Affairs within 1 week to ensure that the final version reflects the skills that are needed by our economy. This too has taken far too long to be done, but it is now going to be done. The momentum that Operation Vulindlela has already built and the support that it has received across government shows that we are serious about reform. We will continue to work relentlessly and without pause to create a more modern, a more efficient and competitive economy that is more open to all South Africans. Now, to support our reform process, the Presidential State-Owned Enterprise Council has outlined a clear set of reforms that will enable these vital public companies to fulfill their mandate for growth and development. Overarching legislation for state-owned enterprises will be tabled in Cabinet this financial year and Parliament in the next financial year. A centralized SOE model is being implemented this financial year, which will ensure a standardized governance, financial management, and operational performance framework for all our SOEs. The mandates of all SOEs are being re-evaluated to ensure that they are responsive to the country's needs and the implementation of the National Development Plan. In the midst of the economic damage caused by COVID-19, South Africa's agricultural sector has performed remarkably well. In 2020, we became the world's second largest exporter of citrus, with strong export growth in wine, in maize, in nuts, in deciduous fruit, and in sugarcane. Now, the favorable weather conditions in 2020 and the beginning of the 2021 mean that agriculture is likely to grow in the near term. This provides an opportunity for further public-private partnerships in the agricultural sector to promote transformation and to ensure sustainable growth. It is an opportunity to accelerate land redistribution through a variety of instruments, such as land restitution, expropriation of land, in order to boost agricultural output. To date, government has redistributed over 5 million hectares of land, totaling around 5,500 farms to more than 300,000 beneficiaries. This is in addition to the land restitution process, which has benefited over 2 million land claimants and resulted in the transfer of 2.7 million hectares of land. We are also pursuing programs to assist smallholder and emerging farmers with market access to develop skills across the entire agricultural value chain and to increase the number of commercial Black farmers as well. During the course of the next financial year, we will establish a land and agrarian reform agency to fast-track land reform. The public service is at the coalface of government, and lack of professionalism does not just impact service delivery, it also dents public confidence. Now, advancing honesty, ethics, and integrity in the public service is critical if we are to build a capable state. Now, through the National School of Government, we continue to roll out courses and training programs to government officials, from entry level to senior management and to the executive. In October last year, I signed off on ministerial performance agreements with all ministers, which have now been published online. This will enhance accountability and focus performance by members of the executive. We remain on course to build a capable and professional civil service that delivers on its mandate and is accountable to the people of South Africa. We are proceeding with our efforts to strengthen local government and to strengthen local government infrastructure and accelerate service delivery through the district development model. The model brings all spheres of government to focus on key priorities and implementation of critical high-impact projects. Working with both public and private sector partners, government is implementing a range of measures to support municipalities to address inadequate and inconsistent service delivery in areas such as water provision, infrastructure build, maintenance. We are also focusing on the appointment of properly qualified officials at local level to ensure effective management and provision of services. In some municipalities, we've often found that less than well-qualified people have been appointed, and all they ever do is to mess up. Now we are saying the days of messing up are now over. We want professional people to run our local government. As we prepare for local government elections, which are due to take place this year, we will need to adjust to the conditions forced upon us by COVID-19 so that we can ensure that the people of this country can determine who represents them at the crucial level of government. So, fellow South Africans, corruption is one of the greatest impediments to the country's growth and development. The revelations from the Zondo Commission of Inquiry lay bare the extent of state capture and related corruption. Now, testimony of the Commission has shown how the criminal justice system was compromised and weakened. It is therefore vital that we sustain the momentum of rebuilding that we have begun through the past 3 years. There has been great progress in turning around law enforcement bodies. Critical leadership positions have been filled with capable, experienced, and trustworthy professionals. There is improved cooperation and sharing of resources between the respective law enforcement agencies, enabling more integrated approach to investigations and prosecutions. we have started the implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which lays the basis for a comprehensive and integrated society-wide response to corruption. We will shortly be appointing the members of the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council, which is a multi-sectoral body that will oversee initial implementation of the strategy and the establishment of an independent statutory and anti-corruption body that will report to this Parliament. To this Parliament, not to the executive, but to this Parliament, to all of you sitting here, it will report. When reports started to surface last year about possible fraud and corruption in the procurement of COVID-related goods and services, we acted with speed, decisively, to put a stop to these practices, to investigate all allegations, to act against those responsible. We established the Fusion Center, which brings together key law enforcement agencies to share information and resources. Now, this Fusion Center has brought many cases to trial and preserved or recovered millions of rands in public funds. The Special Investigating Unit was authorized to investigate allegations of unlawful conduct with respect to COVID procurement by all state bodies during the national state of disaster. As it reported last week, the SIU has finalized investigations into 164 contracts with a total value of 3.5 billion rand. In a significant advance to transparency and accountability, the Political Party Funding Act will come into operation on the 1st of April of this year. Yeah? Well, you don't seem to be very excited about this. It's now going to happen. This will regulate public and private funding of political parties. Among other things, it requires the disclosure of donations to parties and establishes two funds that will enable represented political parties to undertake their programs. Crime and violence continues to undermine people's sense of safety and security. Tackling crime is central to the success of our recovery. Crimes like cable theft, railway infrastructure vandalism, land invasion, construction sites disruptions, and attacks on trucks hamper economic activity and discourages investment. We are taking steps and will continue to take steps to stop these crimes and to deal with those responsible in terms of the law. Task teams have been set up in a number of provinces to deal with extortion and violence on sites of economic activity. We are also fast-tracking the implementation and capacitation of the Border Management Agency to curb illegal immigration and cross-border crime. That is now going to happen. Ending gender-based violence is imperative if we lay claim to being a society that is rooted in equality and non-sexism. When I launched the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide in April last year, I made a promise to the women and children of our country that we were going to strengthen the criminal justice system to prevent them being traumatized again and to perpetrators justice. Now, to give effect to this, 3 key pieces of legislation were introduced in Parliament last year to make the criminal justice system much more effective in combating gender-based violence. To ensure that perpetrators are brought to book, we are making progress in reducing the backlog of gender-based violence cases. We continue to provide care and support to survivors of gender-based violence. In the State of the Nation address last year, I said that we would prioritize the economic empowerment of women. Last year, Cabinet approved a policy that 40% of public procurement should go to women-owned businesses and entities. And our several departments in government have started implementing this policy and are making a great deal of progress. Last week, we also launched a groundbreaking private sector-led GBVF response fund. Several South African companies and global philanthropies made pledges to the value of 128 million rand to assist in the fight against gender-based violence. Now, that was unprecedented. Over the next 3 years, government will allocate approximately 12 billion rand to implement the various components of the National Strategic Plan. Gender-based violence will only end when everyone takes responsibility for doing so in their homes, in their communities, in their workplaces, and in their places of worship, and in our centers of learning, schools, universities, and colleges. Equally, we need to give attention to issues affecting children, including improving school readiness, ECD planning, and funding protection against preventable diseases, policy reform around child welfare and reducing violence against children. In the year ahead, we are also going to forge ahead with efforts to provide greater opportunities to persons with disabilities to participate in the economy and in society in general. As we rebuild our economy in the midst of this pandemic, it is necessary that we continue within our means to provide support to those businesses and individuals that continue to be most affected. Businesses in several sectors are still struggling, and many families continue to suffer as the job market slowly recovers. Over the last few months, we have had ongoing discussions with our social partners in business, in labor, and community-based organizations on the proposed extension of some of the social and economic support measures. We have therefore decided to extend the period for the special COVID-19 grant of 350 by a further 3 months. This has proven to be an effective and efficient short-term measure to reduce the immediate impact on the livelihoods of poor South Africans who are out of work. We've also decided to extend the COVID-19 TERS benefit until the 15th of March 2021, only for those sectors that have not been able to open or to operate. The conditions for this extension and the sectors to be included will be announced after consultation with the social partners at NEDLAC. The National Treasury will work with its partners and stakeholders on improvements that we believe now need to take place to the loan guarantee scheme that we inaugurated when we announced the 500 billion rand distress relief package. Now, this is better addressed through the discussions that will be had, but we also wanted to address the realities of small, medium enterprises and other businesses as they strive to recover. So that scheme needs to be recrafted, repositioned, and the Minister of Finance will deal with the matter. Now, we will work with our social partners to ensure that these and other interventions provide the relief to those who need it most. Now, fellow South Africans, just as a harsh fire gives new life to our country's flamboss, this crisis is an opportunity to build a different and a better South Africa. Rebuilding our country requires a common effort. It requires that every South African takes responsibility and plays their part. Let us work together as government, as business, as labor, as political parties, and all of society to clear away the rubble and lay a new foundation as we rebuild our country. Above all, let us return this country to the values upon which it was founded. On the day of his release 31 years ago, Madiba gave his first public address here in Cape Town, where he reminded South Africans that there were difficult days that lay ahead and that the battle was far from won. Madiba said, "Now is the time to intensify the struggle on all fronts. To relax our efforts now would be a mistake which generations to come will not be able to forgive." Close quotes. In counting the great cost to our society over the past year, we may be tempted to lose faith. But we can get through this because we are a nation that never gives up. We are a nation that is never defeated. We are a nation of heroes right across the country. I'm referring not to the glorious lineage of struggle icons, but to the everyday heroes that walk amongst us, who work hard every day to put food on the table of their homes, to keep the company running, and to give support, help, and care to our people. It is your resilience that will help this country recover. In addition to the many challenges that beset our people, we have heard that His Majesty King Goodwill Zwelithini has not been well in recent days, and he has had to be admitted to hospital. I wish to convey my wishes for speedy recovery of His Majesty King Zwelithini. Our thoughts and prayers are with the royal household and the Zulu nation at this difficult time that the king is going through. It is our collective wish that Isilo Samabandla wonke is soon restored to good health. As we prepare for the difficult path that lies ahead, we can draw strength from Maya Angelou's great poem, I Rise. And she writes, out of the hearts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling. I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, and I rise. Close quotes. Now, people of South Africa, it is your country that calls on you to rise. Let us march forward together to equality, to growth, to dignity, and to recovery. May God continue to bless and protect our beautiful country, and also to protect her sons and daughters. I thank you.
Long live President Ramaphosa, long live! Imbongi must fall, man. Hey,
Thank you very much.
this thing imbongi must fall.
Thank the honorable
Long live the chair. Long live.
Having thanked the president
Imbongi.
to indicate that after I've attended the joint members who are in the chamber, has left the chamber. The procedure adhering to social distancing and led by the acting sergeant at arms and the usher will leave the chamber in the following order. The Speaker of the National Assembly, the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces.
We are a nation of heroes. We will overcome, we shall overcome, and we will be resilient. Quinita, strong, inspirational speech from President Ramaphosa.
Almost like a motivational speech to
Yes.
say, despite the challenges, invoking Maya Angelou now at the end,
Yes.
saying, I rise. And I think that that's what Ramaphosa had to offer tonight, is just some sort of optimism that we are going to be better than where we were, given the challenges that he outlined in his speech.
Did he succeed in giving us that optimism? Well, we're going to be with you for a little while more to analyze the speech. It's myself, Adriaan Basson. I'm joined by Quinita Hunter, the political editor of News 24, as well as Lamise Omaji, our economics writer from Fin24. And we now also welcome political analyst Ongama Mtimka from Port Elizabeth. Ongama, welcome.
Thank you for having me this
Always
evening.
a pleasure. Ongama, your first reactions to the fifth State of the Nation address by President Cyril Ramaphosa?
I think we must state that the trust deficit between the South Africans and the state is huge. So anything that narrows that takes a lot more than the Sona speech. I think he tried his best to cover the wide range of issues that are of concern to us. There were quite some good updates on what has been achieved despite the challenges. But I think some of the promises, unfortunately, will fail to stick, Adriaan, given the fact that there's so much mistrust and there's so much erosion of trust among South Africans that one possible response in some instances is we'll see it when it happens.
Mpumelelo Mkabela has also joined us, a political analyst from Pretoria and a weekly News 24 columnist. Mpumi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Your first take on the fifth Sona of President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa.
Good evening, Adriaan. My impressions are as follows. One, I think the president clearly will continue with this consensus approach. There was a consistent theme throughout the speech where he refers to social partners. Social partners have agreed to that. We're going to approach social partners to do this and that. We are awaiting social partners to do. So that idea of consulting other stakeholders will continue, both business and labor. He's one president, unlike the other presidents, who really takes NEDLAC very seriously. That's where business, labor, and civil society meet and thresh out issues. It's not always successful, but I think his model of leadership, of being a consensus seeker, is coming through in the speech consistently throughout. Whether he's referring to the master plans, the sectoral master plans on automotive sector, on poultry, on sugar, he refers to the social partners. And when he talks about corruption, he's got a new institution that is establishing now. In fact, two institutions that are going to deal with corruption. One is statutory, is going to report to Parliament. The other one is a multi-sectoral body. And in there, he wants to include social partners and other stakeholders outside government. So the idea of him being a consensus leader comes very strong in this speech. And then number two, I think, Adriaan, more than his previous speeches, and perhaps even more than previous States of the Nation addresses of the other presidents before him. This speech was so numbers driven. There's so much numbers that he has thrown around. And of course, there's always a risk to throwing numbers around because you pin your promises too precisely that you can be evaluated and be found wanting. But the advantage for us as ordinary people is that is good because we're able to track through data analysis, evaluation, we're able to track whether the president is indeed fulfilling his promises. So I like the numbers thing, but from a political point of view, it's got a downside. So I'm happy that he was able to at least risk it and put numbers out there. I mean, the numbers are outstanding. From the Eskom numbers that he's mentioned up to gender-based violence-related figures or amounts that are required to tackle gender-based violence, that for me is interesting. Maybe the last point to make is the fact that although he tried to report back on a lot of the promises that he made before, I don't think he reported adequately enough. And I think on the issue of ministerial performances, performance appraisals, he says each minister now has a KPIs, and he says all these things are on the website. And I hope all of us journalists will be plowing on the government website to check what's the KPI for each and every minister. I think my criticism is this: it would have been nice if whatever he has set targets for each minister, if it had come from his mouth now, if he had said, this minister, in short, this department, this is my target for them, so that at least we take it from the horse's mouth, as it were, instead of us going to the website to interpret it for ourselves.
It was a very business-friendly State of the Nation. At some points, as Mpumelelo has referred,
it felt like a budget speech to me. There was lots of numbers to scribble down. Lamise, I want to come to you in a moment to talk to us about the biggest business and economic announcements, the new stuff that we didn't know before tonight, and whether there were indeed new announcements. But before we get to those numbers, Quinita, politically, it was very business friendly. It was very private sector friendly. What did you make of that?
Absolutely. And I think that there has to be some analysis of the fact that he didn't go into great detail around COVID-19 and the vaccine program, etc. And probably this is because the president acknowledges that the economy has to be at the focus of his year ahead. And so really it was, one may even argue a true Ramaphosa speech, focusing on private sector investment, listing them. I've never seen Lamise, a president, list so much of private sector projects.
Mentioning
and
companies by name.
Absolutely. And then also, stressing the point that he's trying to make business easier, in South Africa. Obviously, that was, a far cry from what we've seen before in the previous administration, where government was at the center of jobs, for example, creating of jobs and growing the economy. So a big focus on the private sector, which obviously shows that Ramaphosa is sort of laying down where he wants his presidency to go, in the sense that before he was sort of juggling, the ANC and their sort of plans around growing the economy, and now it's almost at a point that, guys, there's no other way to do this. And the only way we can get confidence is if we, the only way we can get investment is if we increase confidence. And this speech was engineered. This was not for, Gogo Dlamini from KwaMashu or my granny in Rondebosch East. This speech was for big business and for people watching to try to get a sense of, should we still have optimism in the Ramaphosa administration? And I think that's what he tried to do in ticking all the boxes and hitting all the right notes.
Lamise, if you were a CEO of a South African company tonight, would you feel a bit better about the prospects for the future after the speech?
I think what would stand out to me is how he spoke of addressing our energy security problems. Because if I'm going to set up shop here, I want to know that the power isn't going to go out, willy-nilly. So for me, I think those were like the standouts tonight. we heard last year that 2,000 megawatts of emergency power will be procured. That's coming up in 2022, but the successful bids for that power will be announced shortly. I think the energy experts will probably be happy to hear that bid window 5 is also, that tender process will be launched too, and that's going to provide us with 2,600 megawatts of additional power. I think he did stress that even though we're making efforts to get more power, we'll still have like 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts of capacity that we'll still need. Interestingly, he pointed out that Eskom is going to try and expedite processes to sort of get this on the grid. So there is like a sense of urgency. What also stood out to me was just this acknowledgement that the world is changing, climate change is real. So we also need to gear our economy in that sense, and starting in the energy sector.
And obviously he made the point a number of times that every 20 years the fynbos is burned down and new fynbos grows, you know. We can debate about who burned down that fynbos. Ungama Mtimka, you reside in one of the provinces, probably the province that was ravaged hardest by COVID-19. Do you agree with the analysis that the president was almost a bit light on his COVID-19 part of his speech? I'm looking at my notes here. He referred to the vaccination, that it's important that we get the vaccines here. He obviously acknowledged the AstraZeneca incident and then said Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson would now provide us with vaccines. But there was not really anything new that I heard in terms of COVID-19 and in terms of how he and the government plans to tackle that for at least the rest of this year.
So I think he did mention that they want to strengthen healthcare, which is crucial because part of the focus for me has been to what extent are we ensuring that as part of the legacy of responding to COVID-19, the healthcare system itself is strengthened such that it is able to, beyond the pandemic, be able to deal with the healthcare challenges that South Africa is facing, which preceded the COVID-19, by the way. What energized me about the Eastern Cape particularly was the point being made about the repositioning of the port of Ngqura as a container terminal of choice, as well as the strengthening of the rail network between the rail corridor between Gauteng and Port Elizabeth for the export of vehicles. That's important, especially in addressing what has been called the geographic apartheid, the concentration of economic activity in the major centers. I know that people in Durban, for example, are not quite happy with the move of the National Ports Authority from there and Gauteng to the Port of Ngqura. But I think for me, it's important that these provinces where you still have economies of backwardness are prioritized, because that's where the next level of growth is going to come. You can grow the Port of Durban up to, the growth in Durban will always be marginal, but a similar growth in the Eastern Cape in terms of investment is going to have a greater impact because of the economies of backwardness. So that's what I liked, that had a reference to the Eastern Cape. And obviously the construction, the reference to construction, you see the construction sector has been on decline since for a longer period, but since 2018, government capital expenditure has declined. So when government promises and follows through on infrastructure spend, that's going to bode well for provinces which have got less socioeconomic infrastructure.
You've listened to many Sona speeches in your career. I'm not saying you're old, but you are one of the most experienced political journalists and commentators around. What is the purpose of a Sona speech? I mean, I'm asking about new stuff, but did you expect to hear new announcements by the president tonight? He limited his speech to 4 topics, and I thought that was quite clever to kind of limit it to COVID, economic growth, economic reform, and corruption. What was the purpose, do you think, of limiting himself to those 4 matters? And were you satisfied or were you inspired by how he addressed each of them? Mpumi, if you can just unmute yourself.
Sorry, he said it himself up front, what the purpose of this specific Sona was. And he said it had 2 components. One was to give a report back on the undertakings he had made before. And the second element was to give an indication of his plans for the economy in the next medium term or so. So those were his 2 priorities in this speech. That he was very clear. He was not going to go around mentioning literally everything. But he ended up obviously touching on a lot of other stuff. But I think the purpose of a State of the Nation address, especially in the context that we live in now of COVID, people being demoralized, confidence, as my colleague was saying, confidence in the government probably at its lowest level, not so much because of COVID, but there were issues even before COVID. So the purpose of a speech in this context is to uplift the national mood, not by lying or saying things that are, unrealistic, but by being realistic, by confronting the issues, confronting the challenges, without obviously depressing the nation, because the list that we want is for the president to reproduce in his speech that which we already know, and by emphasizing it and depressing us even further. So yes, we want him to acknowledge the problems that we are encountering and our depression. He must acknowledge that. But then he must also say, I'm with you. I want to come out of this depressive mode with you. Because the depression in South Africa is quite, it's both economic, it's social, it's psychological. We're just in a mode which is
Did he lift your mood tonight?
I would say he did not disappoint. I'll put it rather differently. I'll say he did not disappoint.
Was it the friend boss, Mpumi?
Sorry?
Was it the metaphor, the friend boss metaphor?
Well, I'll tell you, I was not really inspired by that metaphor. And there's a reason why. Because we've had metaphors like that before. Remember, we are still dealing with Tito's alu tree. It's going to come back in the next week or so, and I don't know how it's going to look like when he presents it.
Wilted.
And then before that, we've had him, I think it was him who came with the phoenix rising from the ashes, in reference to SAA. And I'm not sure whether the phoenix is rising there. We're still going to hear about that. And then now we hear about the fynbos. So these metaphors are great, but I am not sure whether we are able to leave them as expressed by the politicians.
Colleagues, I have to ask you, you all sound relatively optimistic, but let's just remind ourselves anything, and please remind me if I missed it. I think our viewers will forgive us. It's still fresh after the speech, but we didn't hear a lot about the public sector wage bill that has to be reduced. That's going to be a massive political issue. That's going to cause massive ructions between the president and Labour. And we heard very little, Amies, about Eskom's debt. That is probably one of the biggest threats to our economic viability and the future financing of the country. Did I miss anything on that score? Did you guys hear anything, or were you also surprised that there was very little?
I think it doesn't sound surprising because we've sort of heard it. He didn't add any new detail. Whatever he did say about Eskom is what is already in the public domain. We know NEDLAC is working towards a solution on debt, for example. What I did find interesting was that he did bring up, which we spoke about earlier, was that 200 billion loan scheme. And he did say like they're working on that. But again, no new details, but they're working on it.
Well, you told us earlier tonight that only 18 million rand has been loaned from that scheme. So, I mean, we almost needed a bit more detail. Konito, how would Kusatu, for example, how would they have heard this speech tonight?
I think that the focus on job creation is probably going to be welcomed by business and labour, particularly because what you've seen, the bloodbath in the employment sector. And I think that there is some sort of optimism. Obviously, COSATU will caution about singing to the tune of private businesses, and that's sort of expected. I do think that it's interesting to see some of the announcements. So COSATU is going to welcome the extension of the grant, the COVID-19 grant. Was it 3 months?
3 months, yes.
And then there's going to be an extension to the TERS benefit for those industries that were affected. So I suppose the liquor industry would be one, maybe even tourism or aviation. So that's probably a welcome relief because it was going to be halted. Then there's this interesting announcement about the corruption advisory and anti-corruption advisory council, and our reporter in Parliament Jan Gerbach very interestingly said that maybe Ramaphosa needs to appoint a commission to overlook the work of all of these councils that he appoints, because there's just so many councils.
We don't need more councils, we need arrests.
Yeah, Ramaphosa will say he can't arrest people. but yeah, so those are interesting developments, some sort of tangible announcements, which again, what Mpumelelo said, we can hold him against. And I think there was not a lot of it, but I do appreciate what was announced so that we could sort of look at it a year later or some months later and say, okay, how far are we in this regard?
Ongama or Mpumelelo, do any of you want to comment on the fact that there was very little detail on specifically the public sector wage bill? Yeah, sure.
Now, you're identifying a very critical issue here. And for me, it's not so much about the public sector wage bill specifically, but it's about the president's preference of a macroeconomic strategy. Because it's about how does what he has said today, how does it square up with the available resources of the country? And that talks about the macroeconomic plan in terms of expenditure versus income that the government gets from taxes and other sources of revenue. He might have left that to the finance minister to speak about in his budget, but I think he should have at least given a hint of his approach on how he believes government's books should be balanced.
Ongama, back to you on the corruption topic. The president left it for last before he ended with some poetry. But he did speak about the Zondo Commission. And what was interesting to me, he specifically referred to how the criminal justice system was captured. And we just heard all this evidence about the State Security Agency and what had happened there for the past 10 years. And then there was that interesting moment where he spoke about the political party funding almost under the umbrella of corruption. And he got very little applause from any of the MPs in the House. How did you interpret that moment?
So the president is quite right that the capacity to respond to corruption and ensure that there is successful follow through up to a level of successful prosecution and conviction has been a challenge. So what energizes me is not so much what was in his speech, but the fact that we have seen some the reports, for example, of the SIU, one in October and one last week, where it was reporting on how much monies are being recouped from Eskom corruption, who has been followed, what is the scale of corruption around PPEs, the work of the NPA, among others. So that's all commendable. What I don't like, though, and it relates to the point you were discussing earlier, shortly before you asked this one. You see, with Sona's, precisely because we don't have a framework for assessing the state of the nation, with discussing what is it that they have foregrounded, as opposed to actually going back and say, well, the framework is this. So this year's one was slightly different from previous speeches. I wouldn't say all the speeches, but certainly in the past 11, 12 years. In fact, what I did an exercise last year, which assessed the many times when there were references to past tense in was, were, have, has, and it was quite strange. from 20 of messages which were reporting, I saw that the president attempted this time to have some significant reporting, but I still must emphasize it's a far cry of what we should get from a message of an overall sense of where things are in the country.
I just want to ask you one last question. What's the one thing you will remember from this speech?
About reference to the future. I think one thing that I picked up is that all presidents, they tried to be institutionalists. They tried to innovate. They tried to develop something around institutions. And in this case, the president tried to say, listen here, I'm going to have two institutions on corruption. One is, sectoral, involving every society. The other one is going to be statutory. And then he also says, I know in the country there's a water problem. I'm going to establish a new and all of that. I don't know where that will fit in. And I don't know how much of that is driven by the corruption that happened under Nomvula Mokonyane, for example. And then he talks about another agency that is going to set up, Rural and Agricultural Reform, Agrarian Reform Agency. And then there's another agency that will be formed, SOE agency, state-owned enterprise agency that's going to relook at the new ways in which SOEs should operate. So from an institutional point of view, I like to observe institutions evolve and look at the purpose that they play in society and how we can evaluate them. I really look forward to those institutions coming up, because those are going to be like the Ramaphosa institutions. We know under Thabo Mbeki, we had the Scorpions for fighting corruption. Under him were the best anti-corruption acts being passed by Parliament in 2004, although never implemented by the NPA. Of course, the Scorpions was disbanded. So now Ramaphosa has got all these new institutions floating around. I really look forward to see how they take shape.
Thank you, Mpumelelo, and thank you for joining us tonight.
I just can't help myself to comment on Mpumelo's point around the fact that what is the point of government if we're going to have all of these agencies? That's, you're literally duplicating the work of existing government departments and we already have such a...
Outsourcing government.
Yes. Because what do you need a national advisory council when you have an anti-corruption task team, which makes up of coordinating structures of crime-fighting institutions? The same with, all of these things that he mentions. What is the role then of, the Department of Water and Sanitation, for example? I worry about this. I worry about the duplication.
And unfortunately, we've got a track record under the wasted 9 years where we've seen those institutions and SOEs being exactly used as the vehicles for capture and for corruption.
And now you're creating this another layer on top of this. So we know that we have so many SOEs and so many state entities, right? And then you're creating this level of these little these little structures of advisory councils. So then what happens then is that incompetence can thrive because no one knows who is responsible for what.
Excellent point. Lamise, your last point, we're wrapping for tonight. We didn't hear anything about SAA. We heard a lot about the private sector tonight. What is your one take home from the speech, and where do you think this leaves Minister Tito Mboweni for his budget speech?
I'm going to start with the last one rather. I think we weren't expecting Ramaphosa to give too many details on economic reform, to be honest. We always knew that was something the Treasury is supposed to give guidance on. So I'm assuming Mboweni will probably unpack more when it comes to SAA. We just got a brief statement on the SOE Council tonight. I think I haven't looked at the analysis coming in yet, but I'm pretty sure there'll be some upset about the lack of detail. The new things that I could see, and those were just really updates on processes, was in the energy sector.
Ungama, Timka, closing remarks from you.
So I liked the investments from Ford, the revitalization of the automotive component manufacturing sector, and then the localization drive in general and buying from small businesses. But those things need follow through, Adriaan. We need the state to commit to seeing things through, especially in the automotive sector. We know that, for example, one of the things that are going to happen is international quality standards and national standards are going to preclude small players in that sector. So yes, there are organizations like the AIDC, but you do need a meaningful follow through from the state in order to make sure that there's broader participation in manufacturing.
Last word to my colleague Kunita Hunter, political editor of News 24. On a scale from 0 to 10, where do you rate the speech?
That's a hard one. I think it was a solid 6, and I'll attribute it to most of those points to the Maya Angelou speech, the Maya Angelou poem. But I mean, it was. I suppose it was a tough speech. I said earlier that it was probably the hardest one that he would have had to deliver. I do think that the acknowledging of the problems is a right step, but I really think we need more detail in how we're going to move forward. The announcements, albeit few, were very significant, and I think that it also hit the right tone in terms of the somber nature of the country and the effort then to sort of motivate people and talk about the resilience, considering what a difficult year we've had.
Business friendly, light on detail, and inspirational. That seems to be the consensus. Thank you very much to my guests, Kunita Hunter, Lamise Omaji, and Ungama Mtimka, also Mpumelelo Mkabela, who joined us from Pretoria. And thank you very much to you, the viewers, for sticking to us tonight for coverage of the 2021 State of the Nation address. Follow further coverage on News 24.